She had been walking for almost an hour when she first saw the men. The rain had stopped 20 minutes earlier, leaving the world dripping and gray, and the road leading out of the small town of Millbrook was a ribbon of churned-up mud. Sarah Jenkins pulled the collar of her worn coat tighter around her neck, her second-hand boots squelching with every step. She was used to the wet, used to the cold, used to the weight of the overstuffed backpack that dug into her shoulders. At 63, she was not used to being shouted at by a group of men in a muddy field. The men were part of a cleanup crew, or so their fluorescent vests claimed. They were loud, laughing and shoving each other as they unloaded equipment from the back of a large truck. They had the air of people who were not from around here, weekend warriors from the city perhaps, sent to help with the post-storm recovery. The storm, a brutal late autumn tempest, had swept through the county 3 days ago, leaving a trail of downed trees, flooded basements, and a thick, clinging layer of silt and debris everywhere. Sarah was heading to the church hall at the other end of town. They were giving out hot meals, and her small pension didn't stretch to much more than the basics. Her little cottage, a rented room really, on the edge of town had escaped the worst of it, but it was damp and drafty, and the chill had seeped into her bones. She kept her head down, her eyes on the treacherous path, focusing on putting one foot in front of the other. "Hey, you, old woman!" The shout cut through the air. Sarah ignored it at first. People didn't usually shout at her. She was invisible to most. "I'm talking to you!" The voice was closer now, aggressive. She looked up. One of the men, a big fellow with a red face and a week's worth of stubble, was striding towards her, his heavy boots sinking into the mud. The other two hung back, smirking. "You can't be walking here," he said, planting himself in her path. "This area is off limits. It's a cleanup zone. Didn't you see the signs?" Sarah looked around. There were no signs, just the road, the field, and the gray sky. "I'm just trying to get to the church hall," she said, her voice quiet but steady. "Church hall? That's the other side of town. This is a shortcut," the man sneered. "But it's not a shortcut for you. This is a work site. We're trying to clear this mess. Go clean up your own backyard. We don't need you under our feet." "I'm not bothering anyone," Sarah said. "You're bothering me," he said, stepping closer. His friends chuckled. "Go on, get lost. Take the long way around through the woods. It's only another mile or so." Sarah knew the woods. They were dense, dark, and the paths would be a quagmire after the rain. At her age, with her tired, she felt a hot tear of shame and anger prick at her eyes, but she willed it away. She would not cry in front of them. She started to get to her feet, her body trembling with cold and shock. It was then that she saw the other man. He hadn't been with the group by the truck. He must have been walking up the road from the opposite direction. He was of average height, with a lean, weathered face and short, gray-flecked hair. He wore a simple waxed jacket and carried himself with a stillness that was out of place in the commotion. He had stopped about 20 feet away, and he had seen everything. His eyes, a pale, piercing blue, were fixed not on Sarah, but on the man who had pushed her. The big man noticed him too. "What are you looking at, Grandpa?" he called out, his bravado now directed at a new target. The newcomer didn't answer. He simply walked over to where Sarah was struggling to her feet. He offered her a hand. His grip was firm and surprisingly warm. "Are you all right, ma'am?" he asked. His voice was low and calm. Sarah nodded, too shaken to speak. He helped her to the side of the road, his presence a solid wall between her and the jeering men. "Hey, I'm talking to you!" The big man took a few aggressive steps towards them. His friends followed, their smirks replaced by curious, slightly wary expressions. The man who had helped Sarah finally turned to face them. He didn't look angry. He didn't look scared. He just looked patient, as if he had all the time in the world. He stood with his weight evenly balanced, his hands relaxed at his sides. It was a posture Sarah didn't recognize, but the three men on some primal level did. It was the stance of a man who knew exactly how to handle himself. A flicker of uncertainty crossed the big man's face. "We're with the cleanup crew," the big man blustered, pointing a thumb back at his truck. "She was trespassing, I was just telling her to move along. You pushed her, the man in the waxed jacket said. His voice was still calm, but it carried a weight that made the words hang in the damp air. It was a shove. She was in the way. The big man puffed out his chest. And who the hell are you to tell me anything? My name is John, the man said. He took a slow step forward. John Hayes. The name didn't mean anything to Sarah, but the effect it had on the men was immediate and profound. The color drained from the face of one of the friends. The other took a half step back. The big man's bluster seemed to deflate just a little. John Hayes? The friend behind him whispered, his eyes wide. The John Hayes? The SEAL? John ignored the whisper. His attention was solely on the man who had done the pushing. She's cold, she's wet, and she's shaken up, all because you couldn't let an old woman walk down a public road. He took another step. He was now just a few feet from the big man. Now you're going to apologize to her. The big man's jaw tightened. His pride warred with the very real, very palpable sense of danger his instincts were screaming at him. He was bigger than John Hayes, probably 20 years younger, but he had never faced a man like this. He had never seen eyes that cold, that focused. It was like being stared down by a wolf. Apologize? He scoffed, but his voice cracked on the word. For what? She shouldn't have been... John moved. It wasn't a punch or a grab. He simply closed the remaining distance in one smooth, silent step and placed a hand lightly on the big man's shoulder. It was a gesture that could have been friendly, but the look in his eyes said otherwise. He leaned in and said something so quietly that Sarah, standing just a few feet away, couldn't hear it. Whatever it was, it worked. The big man's face went pale. He swallowed hard. John removed his hand and stepped back, his expression unchanged. The big man stood frozen for a long, horrible moment. Then, with a visible effort, he turned to face Sarah. He wouldn't meet her eyes. I'm sorry, ma'am, he mumbled, the words barely audible. I shouldn't have done that. John nodded, a single, sharp movement. Now you and your friends can go back to your work, he gestured towards the truck. And maybe think about what you just did. The three men didn't need to be told twice. They turned and walked quickly, almost stumbling back towards their vehicle, not looking back. The silence they left behind was thick and profound. The only sound was the drip of water from a nearby tree. Sarah stood there, shivering, her mind struggling to process what had just happened. John turned back to her. The cold focus in his eyes was gone, replaced by a gentle concern. Ma'am, you're shaking. We need to get you somewhere warm. Sarah just stared at him. What did you say to him? A ghost of a smile touched his lips. I just reminded him that a true test of a man isn't how he treats those who can fight back, but how he treats those who can't. And that I had 30 years of experience helping people who've forgotten that remember it. He shrugged. Sometimes a quiet reminder is all it takes. He put a gentle hand under her elbow. Come on, is there somewhere nearby? A coffee shop? Your home? The church hall, Sarah stammered. They have food, warmth. It's at the other end of this road. Then that's where we're going, he said firmly. He offered her his arm. Let's get you cleaned up first, though. He pulled a clean, folded handkerchief from his pocket. It was a simple, old-fashioned thing. He wet a corner in a puddle that was cleaner than the one she'd fallen in and gently wiped the mud from her cheek. The gesture was so tender, so unexpectedly kind, that Sarah felt the tears she had held at bay finally threaten to spill over. As they started to walk slowly, John Hayes matching his long stride to her hobbled one, Sarah looked up at him. You were a Navy SEAL? She asked. A long time ago, he said. Now I'm just a man who was walking to get a cup of coffee. They walked in silence for a while. Sarah's shivering began to subside, replaced by a profound sense of warmth that had nothing to do with the temperature. She wasn't just warm from the exertion, she was warm from the sheer, unexpected grace of his presence. The world, which had seemed so gray and hostile just minutes before, now held a different hue. The gray seemed softer, the air cleaner. She glanced at the man beside her, his profile strong and calm against the bleak landscape. He was a stranger, yet she felt a trust in him she hadn't felt for anyone in years. He hadn't just defended her, he had seen her. He had looked at a muddy, tired old woman and seen a person worth standing up for. In a world that had taught her she was invisible, John Hayes had made her feel seen. They reached a small, stone-walled bridge that crossed a rushing, debris-filled stream. A bench, wet from the earlier rain, sat to one side. John guided her towards it. "Let's rest for a moment," he said. He took off his own waxed jacket and draped it over her shoulders. It was still warm from his body heat, and it smelled of leather and clean wool. It was a luxury she couldn't have imagined. "I can't take your coat," she protested weakly. "I'm fine," he said. "I've been in much colder places than this." He sat beside her on the damp bench, seemingly oblivious to the wetness. He looked at her, his pale blue eyes kind. "Can I ask your name?" "Sarah," she said. "Sarah Jenkins." "Well, Sarah Jenkins, it's a pleasure to meet you. I'm sorry it was under such circumstances." They sat for a few minutes, the sound of the rushing water filling the space between them. Then John spoke again, his voice contemplative. "You know, what those men did, it says everything about them and nothing about you. Never let anyone make you feel small, Sarah. Your worth isn't determined by the mud on your coat or the cracks in your boots." Sarah looked down at her muddy, worn-out boots. They were a testament to a hard life, a life of small rooms and smaller meals. But John's words made her see them differently. They were boots that had walked many miles, that had carried her through good times and bad. They were her boots, and they had served her well. "Thank you, John," she whispered, her voice thick with emotion. She wasn't just thanking him for his coat or for walking with her. She was thanking him for reminding her of something she had forgotten, her own dignity. He just nodded, a simple, understated gesture. After a while, they got up and continued their slow walk. The church hall came into view, a modest brick building with a lit sign out front that read, "Warm Meals and Company." The sight of it, of the warm light spilling from its windows, filled Sarah with a sense of relief. As they approached the entrance, a woman inside saw them and rushed to open the door. "Oh, you poor dear," she exclaimed, seeing Sarah's mud-caked state. Come in, what happened?" Before Sarah could answer, John gently removed his jacket from her shoulders. "She just had a little slip in the mud," he said smoothly, with a slight, meaningful glance at Sarah. "A cup of your excellent tea will fix her right up, I'm sure." The woman ushered Sarah inside towards a table near a radiant heater. The hall was warm and filled with the comforting smells of soup and bread. Sarah sank into the chair, the heat seeping into her chilled body. She turned to thank John, to invite him to join her, but when she looked back at the door, he was gone. He had melted away as silently as he had appeared. The woman brought her a steaming bowl of vegetable soup and a thick slice of bread. "The gentleman who was with you," she said, placing the food in front of her. "Was that your son? He seemed very kind." Sarah shook her head, a faint, wondering smile on her face. "No," she said softly, looking out the window at the darkening road. "He was just a man who was walking to get a cup of coffee." She ate her soup slowly, savoring every mouthful, not just of the food, but of the memory. She thought about John Hayes, the Navy SEAL veteran, who with a few quiet words and a simple act of kindness had not only stood up for her, but had lifted a weight from her spirit she hadn't even known she was carrying. He had proven the troops wrong. He had proven that true strength isn't about pushing someone down, but about having the courage and the compassion to lift them up. The mud had long since dried on her coat, but the warmth he had left in her heart would stay with her for a very long time. And as she sat there, in the warm, crowded hall, Sarah Jenkins, for the first time in a long time, felt truly, deeply, and completely clean.